Well, good morning, and thank you very much, Chrissy, for your prayer, and lovely to be with you again this morning on what looks like another magic Victorian day. Back home, it's pouring rain, so it's really nice to be with you. And the concert was fabulous. I enjoyed the concert. I had the privilege of sitting about the third seat from the front and just feel that music. It was just terrific, wasn't it? It was just great. I hope you all remember daylight saving. The fact that you're here now is looking good. Looking good. You got it right. As said, I'm joined by my wife Carol here this morning. Do you want to say hello to the people?
Hello.
Is that it?
Well, you just said to say hello.
Well, you normally don't seek my permission to speak.
Hello, everybody.
That's better. That's better. Yeah, it's lovely to have Carol here. I wanted to share with you, I'll switch this on. We have our National Christian Family Conference coming up, and I just want to share that with you, just to sneak in this little announcement. If you are a counsellor, social worker, a pastor, or a concerned parent, you have teenagers, or you know somebody who is, we'd love to share with you. This is our 29th National Christian Family Conference. We're very excited. We've got some pretty high flyers coming in for a 2-day conference in Sydney, and we usually have folk coming up from Melbourne for the conference over the years. We have Professor Gordon Parker, Ross Grant, David Bennett, Ellie Taylor, Heather Irvine Rundle, some key players who are going to present over the 2 days on adolescent issues. So I do have some application forms here with me. If you'd like to see us after the program, do come and see me. This afternoon at our workshop in the youth tent at 2:30, we've called it Keeping Love Alive, and I'd like to share with you, there's a pretty good chance that if you're married, every now and then you might have a little bit of conflict. I know it wouldn't be often. Every now and then, and in fact, if couples come to me and say, Traff, we don't have any fights, we don't argue at all, I usually say, just check to see if you're breathing. You put two people together and you're going to have some conflict. What we don't realise that often we have the same conflict, just different content. I want to talk about how do we manage conflict that emerges in our relationships, and what strategies might we find to deal with that better. Tomorrow morning, we'd love you to join us if you're able. We've called it the very best gift. And I want to share with you, exciting tomorrow, some good news. What's the very best gift we can give our families and our marriages? And I want to base it on and share with you some research that was done over quite a number of years. They researched 14,000 families over 24 countries for quite a number of years, and they were looking for what are the indicators of healthy families. And I want to share with you the results. 24 countries. This is right across cultures. And let's share with you what are some of the key gifts that we can give to our families. Well, today we've called it Bill's granddaughter's husband's mother. Some time back, Bill Baker of London married Edna Harvey. Now, Edna happened to be Bill's granddaughter's husband's mother. Well, that was pretty confusing for Bill's granddaughter, Lynn. And she said this, my mother-in-law is now my step-grandmother. My grandfather is now my stepfather-in-law. My mum is my sister-in-law, and my brother is my nephew. I'm now married to my uncle, and my own children are my cousins. Don't you love that? Aren't families fun? Irrespective of our marital status here today, whether we're married or single, we're part of a family somewhere. And I guess if I came to your home and snuck inside your kitchen, on the walls of the hall or the kitchen or on your fridge door, there's going to be some photos that will tell me what part of the tree you are hanging on. We're all on a limb of the family tree somewhere.
For many years, a family, especially in Australia, was defined as mum and dad and 2.5 kids. But families around the world haven't always been defined in such a way. Do you recognise this lady? This is Susanna Wesley, mother of John and Charles Wesley, and she was the 25th child in her family. And now notice this text in Genesis 14. When Abram heard that his relative Lot had been taken captive, he called out the 318 trained men born in his household and went in pursuit of them as far as Dan. That is serious, family. Imagine Christmas time.
318 born in his family, and they were the trained men. What about their wives and the kids? Serious, it's just amazing. A recent family reunion, the largest family reunion, was achieved by the... Now look, I'm not real good at French, okay? Forgive me if you are French. Porto-Bolivar, that sounds very impressive, at Saint-Paul-Montpeny. Ooh. In France, 4,514 family reunion. So families are quite different. Now notice this, I don't know whether you can see this slide, but this was the 2011 census of Australian families. You'll notice back in 1976, almost half of families had dependent children. But you'll notice in 2011, couple-only families, the yellow stripe on the right, is just a sneak ahead above couples with dependent children. In other words, this data suggests that in 2011 in Australia, couples without children was a more common family type than couples with children. So families have changed significantly over the years and countries. But I want to share with you this text. This text may not be familiar to you. It says this: "A father to the fatherless, a defender of widows, is God in his holy dwelling. God sets the lonely in families." And I was excited to read that text. God sets the lonely in families. And it's in families where we discover that sense of we belong and we enjoy that family connection. But I'm sure most of us are much more familiar with this text. "It's not good that man should be alone," found in the record in Genesis. And it's easy to pass over this portion of the text in our desire to think more of the second half of the text. "It is not good that you be alone, I'll make a helpmeet for you." And I think men particularly like that second half of the verse. But we can't afford to pass over this particular portion of the text. Why? Because research over the last 30 years or so has really brought to our attention the significance of this text. Carol, share with us a quote from a book published by James Lynch. It was called "The Broken Heart, The Medical Consequences of Loneliness," published in 1978. So we're going well back, but this is what he said.
This book is about life and death, love, companionship and health, and loneliness that can break the human heart. Its purpose is simple: to document the fact that reflected in our hearts there is a biological basis for our need to form loving human relationships. If we fail to fulfil that need, our health is in peril. He also said social isolation, the lack of human companionship, death or the absence of parents in early childhood, sudden loss of love, and chronic human loneliness are significant contributors to premature death. Almost every cause of death is significantly influenced by human companionship. And thirdly, the thesis this book will try to document is this: loneliness and isolation can literally break your heart.
It's interesting that the Japanese have a word for this. It's called takotsubo cardiomyopathy. And takotsubo, Japanese word for a kind of a trap. It's a fish trap or a squid trap, and it was shaped in the way that the heart, our heart, literally moves into when it's in deep stress. And they called it takotsubo cardiomyopathy. And the suggestion is that we can literally die of a broken heart.
Dr. Arch Hart, a well-respected Christian psychologist, said, "Research confirms the importance of human bonds. Without relationships, humans wither and die, both emotionally and physically. The quality of our life diminishes when there's no one to share it with, family, friends, or spouse. Everything about us was designed to live in close community and interaction with others. We certainly were not designed to go throughout life emotionally disconnected." And then Sue Johnson, co-founder of Emotion-Focused Therapy, adds, "We are not equipped to face life alone, especially difficult aspects of life. We are not equipped for it, nor designed for it."
It's interesting. We're not good that man or woman should be alone. The research continues. In 1988, 10 years later, a study was published in the Science Journal, and it was suggested that a lack of social relationships contribute in a significant way to major health risk factors, rivaling the effect of well-established adverse health risk factors such as cigarette smoking, high blood pressure, obesity, and a lack of physical activity. And they reviewed over 148 studies that linked how did they word it? Linked death with social relationships. Over 300,000 participants in a study over 7 years. And they found that people who have significant relationships are 50% less likely to die than those who don't. And so, in fact, they said, we never see a death certificate that states the cause of death as loneliness. This study means that being lonely is as dangerous to your health as the other factors doctors also warn us about. In fact, they said that being lonely slowly inches you towards death as much as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Now, we need to make an important point here, Carol. I could be out on the lake in my kayak, totally alone, and not be lonely, because I know someone's there for me. I know Carol is at home waiting for me, and if she's not, the dog will be with the wagging tail. Someone will be there to greet me when I get home. But I can be at the football match with 80,000 people and be desperately lonely. It's when we know we've got somebody there for us, with somebody there who counts. That's not loneliness, but when we feel we're all alone. Social species do not fare well when forced to live solitary lives, the researchers said. The study also found that as social beings, if we're not able to express that socialness for reasons within our control or not, we start to die a little. So we don't want you to miss the significance of God's words. It's not good that man should be alone. The research continues to demonstrate that. Billy Joel in his song The Piano Man, some of you might know the song, now you'll start humming it, I'm sure you will. Here's the words, just a couple of verses. Now, Paul was a real estate novelist who never had time for a wife, and he's talking with Davy, who's still in the Navy and probably will be for his life. And the waitress is practicing politics as the businessmen slowly get stoned. Yes, they're sharing a drink they call loneliness, but it's better than drinking alone. This little saying that goes like this, it's better to be loved than kicked, but it's better to be kicked than ignored. You and I long to be loved and to cared for and treasured.
Well, all this sounds like worthy reflection, but it can obviously only refer to the past, and certainly not to me personally, because I have a mobile phone, I have the internet, I have Skype, LinkedIn, Twitter, and hundreds of friends on Facebook. So how can I be lonely? Interestingly, research suggests otherwise. A recent article had this to suggest. Current evidence indicates that the quantity and/or quality of social relationships in industrialised societies are decreasing. Ongoing research is indicating that despite increases in technology and globalisation that would presumably foster social connections, people are becoming increasingly more socially isolated. Technology, our prime facilitator of distractions, has given us a world that promises freedom from solitude, but in many cases is only isolating us even more. In a major piece in its May 2012 issue, American magazine The Atlantic even postulated that the ubiquitousness of Facebook in our lives and a growing preference to connect with friends and family via electronic devices rather than physical contact had created an epidemic of loneliness. We are living in an isolation that would have been unimaginable to our ancestors, and yet we have never been more accessible.
I was at a shopping centre recently, and I had to admire the skills of the young lady who was doing the checkout stuff, you know. And she was putting the food articles with one hand through the beeper, and the other one she was doing a text. So it was... She was quick. Very good, with a thumb. I thought, wow, you know, I go... Very impressive. Karen and I were at Dubai Airport just last year on our way to Geneva for a conference, and I wished it wasn't sort of politically correct to take a photo, but there was Dad and his two teenage children sitting there. I think Mum was somewhere maybe getting some food, and there was Dad and teenage boy and teenage girl just sitting there with their iPhones, no dialogue, no chat. You'll see two girls walking along the street. They're mostly chatting to each other via the phone. Yeah. Dr. Sherry Turkle said this in a magazine article, Alone Together. And this is what she said.
Technology is seductive when what it offers meets our human vulnerabilities. And as it turns out, we are very vulnerable indeed. We are lonely, but fearful of intimacy. Digital connections and the social robot may offer the illusion of companionship without the demands of friendship. Our networked life allows us to hide from each other, even as we are tethered to each other. We'd rather text than talk.
There's growing research to suggest that we are breeding a generation of lonely people even in our digital age. One of the most exciting studies that came out not long back was called Hardwired to Connect. You can jump on the Google and look it up on the web. Hardwired to Connect. What happened was this. In the US, they were very concerned about the growing rates of suicide, depression, high-risk behaviour of adolescents. In fact, the depression measures were so high, they matched the measures of their parents' depression for which they were hospitalised. They got 33 professional people and they said, we want some answers. What's the deal? Why is this the case? And they did some fascinating research. They had neurosurgeons, youth specialists and social workers, psychiatrists, psychologists. And the results came out, it was under the title Hardwired to Connect, and it wasn't a religious study. It was prepared by the Commission on Children at Risk, and that was the title, Hardwired to Connect, the new scientific case for authoritative communities. This is what they said. In the midst of unprecedented material affluence, large and growing numbers of US children and adolescents are failing to flourish. More and more young people are suffering from mental illness, emotional distress and behavioural problems. Then they said, what's causing the crisis? And here's what they said. In large measure, what's causing this crisis of American childhood is a lack of connectedness. Isn't that interesting? We mean two kinds of connectedness, close connections to other people and deep connections to moral and spiritual meaning. This wasn't a religious study. I was a chaplain when I read that and nearly fell off my chair. This is very exciting. Right? Kids lack connections, not only connections with other people, but deep connections with moral and spiritual meaning. And I took a chapel for the students at the school and I said, kids, if you're running away from God, give up. You're only operating on half your brain. Your brain's designed to connect this way and that way. And it was exciting. But it's broken connections. And the study said we're doing drug therapy and we're doing activities for the kids on the street and bike scooter ramps and all. That's all good, but that's not the real answer to the problem. We're dealing with broken connections. The members of the Commission make reference to a growing amount of research in biology, neuroscience and a range of other disciplines that is setting important new life on our biological systems. And this is what they said, our biology systems hardwire in human beings the need for enduring and nurturing relationships. This is what they said. The idea is that we are born to form attachments, that our brains are physically wired to develop in tandem with another through emotional communication, beginning before words are spoken. So the researchers continue to tell us that you and I, designed by God, were designed to connect. Our brains are wired to connect with another brain. Right? Even before words are spoken, we have that emotional connection. So that's the way we're made. And it's exciting stuff. The study makes it very clear men and women are biologically primed to form and sustain intimate relationships.
The research continues to support God's declaration that we were designed to connect with others. We were never designed to tackle life alone. James Torrance states, what we need today is a better understanding of the person, not just as an individual, but as someone who finds his or her true being in communion with God and with others. It makes sense that God built within us the need to form loving relationships. We might have been tempted to go it alone, but he knew we can't. We're designed to belong. We've been created for human community, to experience the unique joy of belonging to another. We've been made to connect. As Jack Balswick states, theological anthropology would suggest that bearing the image of God means living as unique individuals in reciprocating relationships with others.
It's interesting, that statement. Thank you, Carol. We often ask, what does it mean to be in the image of God? There's a lot of theological debates. What does that mean? We're in the image of God. Someone has suggested that simply means that just as God is in a relationship with the Spirit, God is relationship, Father, Son and Holy Spirit, so that's the way you and I were designed. Excuse me. Mums, brace yourselves. Ready? Some years ago, the story goes that a mum gave birth to twins in a hospital in the USA. One sec. Excuse me. And it was all very exciting, but the twins arrived prematurely. Well, strange as it may seem, considering that twins are in the womb for quite a while, very, very close together. The hospital policy was that at birth they would separate them. So the little twins in there arm wrestling and fighting and having a great time together at birth. They're in separate humidity cribs. Well, one of the little twins was seemingly doing okay, but the other one wasn't. She was struggling a bit. And so the night duty, against hospital policy, lifted the little baby that wasn't doing too well and put it in beside the baby that was, and here's what happened. That's right. Yeah, I heard all the men go, "Ah." It's called the rescuing hug. Notice down the page, a hospital nurse fought against the hospital rules and placed the babies in one incubator. When they were placed together, the healthy of the two threw an arm over her sister in an enduring embrace. The smallest baby heart rate stabilised and her temperature rose to normal, and they went home together. Isn't that See, we're made for this stuff. You and I were designed by God to connect and be closely knit together. One of the primary antidotes for loneliness is obviously belonging. When we know we belong, we know someone is there for us. We're connected and bound together in love and understanding and acceptance. We have someone on our side. Someone cares for us in a way that counts. We are physically, emotionally, spiritually connected to somebody, and we thrive. Not only survive, we thrive. It's sad, but I understand it's true that one of the groups of adolescents who report the highest measures of self-esteem and self-worth are teens who belong to a gang. And I think that's true because they know they belong. They most probably had to do some little ritual to say, I belong to this gang. And it's reinforced daily as they work together as a gang. You and I were designed to connect. We're designed to be together. And when we have those kind of connections, they lift us up. They're the winds beneath our wings. And when we belong together, it's exciting. Well, let's have a closer look at this idea of belonging. And Carol would like to introduce to an author who has been incredibly inspirational for both of us. I was watching Carol. She was across the room just a couple of weeks ago, and I noticed her reading this book, and next thing, tears coming down her face, and I said, I know which book she's reading. Not because it's sad, it's just incredibly inspirational. It's called My Grandfather's Blessing by Rachel Remen. She wrote an earlier book called Kitchen Table Wisdom. The second one was My Grandfather's Blessing. I committed to it. Carol would like to just share with you a little bit about Rachel Remen.
Rachel was born in New York, and she was the daughter of a Jewish couple who had left the faith. But she was very close to her grandfather, who was an Orthodox rabbi and scholar. He died when she was 7, but his patience lessons and the influence of his unconditional acceptance of her as his granddaughter never left her. She struggled to feel good enough in her successful medical family, but he taught her that blessing one another is what fills our emptiness. It heals our loneliness and connects us more deeply to life. He saw life as a web of connection and believed that everyone belonged to him and he to everyone. Rachel became a doctor and now specialises in ministering to cancer patients. However, she is also herself a patient, as for the last 40 years she has suffered from Crohn's disease and at times has been severely affected by it. These two perspectives enable her to serve others at a deep point of connection. Many times, Rachel Remen says, in talking about her work with cancer patients, my limitations have become the source of my compassion. My wounds have made me gentle with the wounds of others. My loneliness has enabled me to recognise loneliness in others. She goes on, wounding and healing are not opposites. They're part of the same thing. It is our wounds that enable us to be compassionate with the wounds of others. It is our limitations that make us kind to the limitations of other people. It is our loneliness that helps us to find other people or even know that they are alone. I think I have served people perfectly with parts of myself I used to be ashamed of. Rachel introduces us to the idea that service is the final healing of isolation and loneliness. It's the lived experience of belonging. Let's explore together how this can be so. True service, she asserts, is not a relationship between an expert and a problem. Many times when we help, we do not really serve. Serving is different from helping. Helping is not a relationship between equals. The danger in helping is that we may inadvertently take away from people more than we could ever give them. We may diminish their self-esteem, their sense of worth, integrity, or even wholeness. When I first read this, I was immediately reminded of my own experience years ago. Thinking of it still makes me blush, but it allowed me to connect with Rachel's observation in a very personal way. When we lived in Queensland, I was shopping one morning at the markets of a little country town with a friend who was recovering from a recent divorce. She'd just moved to the district and she was stretched financially. We found some small plants that she felt would suit her new front doorstep perfectly, and she decided to buy one. I thought that 2 or 3 would look much better and offered to buy them for her. My intention was good, although I must admit I felt like I was helping her, and that was very obviously reflected in my tone. I was puzzled for a moment why my friend beside me looked a little uncomfortable, but was offered a blinding flash of insight when the friendly sales lady said lightly, "That sounded very condescending." That got me to thinking about what it is to help somebody.
Rachel Remen suggests that when we help somebody, we may see the person we are helping as somehow weaker than ourselves, someone needier. And when we help someone, we become strong because we're operating out of our strength. Others may become aware of that strength too and feel diminished by it. She suggests it potentially positions them in a place of weakness while we appear strong, and that makes it a case of inequality. And suggests that rather than helping, we need to serve, and that's also different to fixing. So now for men, us men, we're naturally born fixers. Ladies know this. We love to fix things because it's broken. And Remen, I think, rightfully points out to us that when we serve, we don't help or fix. We serve as equals. When we fix, we see life as broken. And she says, seeing ourselves as fixers may cause us to see brokenness everywhere, to sit in judgment on others and on life itself. When we try to fix others, we may not see their hidden wholeness or trust the integrity of life in them. She says, when we serve, however, we see life as a whole. This is what she suggests. When we serve, we don't serve with our strength, we serve with ourselves, and we draw from our experiences. Service is a relationship between equals. When we serve, we become more aware of our wholeness and more accepting of it. Our limitations serve, our wounds serve, even our darkness can serve. And Karen and I were just kind of strengthened by this. And here's this Rachel Remen, a doctor, a clever cancer specialist who suffered for 40 years with Crohn's disease, debilitating. And out of this suffering, she says, I learnt to serve. And Carol in a minute is going to share with you a little bit of fascinating experience that she talks about to help illustrate that. But she says, my pain is the source of my compassion. My woundedness is the key to my empathy. And compassion begins with the acceptance of what most humans, that's who we are. In our attending to capacity to suffer, we can uncover a simple and profound connection with other people. And if I operate all constantly out of a sense of I'm here and I'm the strong person to help you and fix you, it really does place us in a vulnerable position, and certainly the one we're trying to reach. And I think Rachel cleverly reminds us that that's most probably not the best way to serve. And see, in our Western society culture, we kind of honour people who are self-sufficient, people who can stand alone, people who can stand strong. We're sometimes at risk of looking down on people who aren't coping too well. And it places us again in that difficult position of being a little bit, higher than others. And it's easy for us to become somewhat intolerant of human needs and just don't get a good measure on that. And true serving suggests connects us to one another and to the world around us. Then when we experience connectedness, serving others become the natural and joyful thing to do. She tells a fascinating story. And I'll just refer to my notes. She tells us about a lady in a car accident whose both arms were broken. Now, I've got a friend of mine, he's a cyclist. He and I did a bit of cycling together. He fell off his bike and broke both his arms. Broke both his arms. Broke both his arms. And you can imagine you're having two arms in plaster. There's not a lot you can do. You have to have everything done for you. And this lady was the same. And she's lying up in hospital. She had lots of food allergies, and the dietitian very carefully and thoughtfully planned her diet. And her first meal arrived, and a few hours later, no one had turned up to feed her. So she's lying there looking at this food going, that would be very nice, but she can't do anything about it. She's lying there with two broken arms. And finally, the lady who was a patient beside her got out of bed, and with her drips and leads and beams, and sort of moved across and spooned the meal into her mouth. And this happened for 4 days in the hospital. And there's this parable about what's the difference between heaven and hell. It's only a parable, okay? But it's interesting, in hell, people are sitting at tables overflowing with food, but they too have splints on their elbows, so they can't reach their mouths with the food. Heaven, it's the same, but the people have spoons to feed each other.
No one in my life so far has taught me as effectively as my own granddaughters what this means. This uninhibited giving and receiving, their joyful or needy touch reflecting unselfconsciously what they're feeling at the time, allows a spontaneous response and a precious sense of belonging. The giving and the receiving are reciprocal. Sometimes a single act of kindness may come from a very unexpected source and have a long trajectory and may touch those that we'll never meet or see. Something that we casually offer may move through a web of connections far beyond ourselves to have effects that we may never have imagined. In 1960, when Rachel was 22 and a third-year medical student, she was assigned to the wards of the Bellevue Hospital in New York. She started working on one of the men's general wards. Each ward was a huge single room filled with 3 rows of beds. She was expected to come an hour or more before the ward rounds each morning and draw all the requested blood samples. And this is the story as she tells it. As a female student, I was a bit of an oddity, and I attracted a certain curiosity. Under the watchful eyes of 50 men, I would go from bed to bed, placing tourniquets on arms, hoping that my meagre skills would be up to finding a vein and taking blood from it. As this was my first clinical rotation, my skills were new. Even though many of the men had done hard physical work most of their lives and had sinewy arms with veins as thick as ropes, I would have to try several times before I was successful in drawing their blood. It was painful for them and agonising for me. During my second week on this service, I was working my way down the middle row of beds and had just stuck a man for the 3rd time without success when I sensed someone close behind me. Turning, I found one of the regulars standing there, a big tough-looking man in his blue Bellevue pyjamas with tattoos covering both of his arms. Without a word, he reached out and picked up one of the unused syringes I had put on the bedside table. With one hand, he tightened the tourniquet around the arm of the man in the bed, and with the other he drew blood from him. It had been done in seconds. I stood there open-mouthed. "Do you have a gauze pad?" he asked me. Silently I produced one, and he pressed it on the man's arm, withdrew the needle and handed me the full syringe. Hands shaking, I emptied it into the specimen tube, my eyes stung with tears. Trying to hide my humiliation, I turned and I went to the next bed, but he followed me. "Doesn't anybody teach you kids how to do this?" he asked me. Unable to speak, I shook my head. "Here, look," he said, and more slowly this time, he wrapped the tourniquet around the patient's arm and found a vein. "See," he said, "keep the hole in the needle up and the vein won't roll away from you." Silently, I put the new specimen into another tube, and we went on again together to the next bed. The man in this bed was smiling and extending his arm. "Here," he said, "you just try. Larry will show you how to do better." I tried and I missed. Larry showed me a better way to hold the syringe, and it was much easier. We went on from bed to bed, Larry offering suggestions and showing me many tricks I'd never known before. By the end of the hour, I was drawing every blood on the first try. Not bad, kid, not bad," Larry told me, and he walked away. The next morning, he was there again, and we went to the bed of the first patient together. I placed a tourniquet around the man's arm and was about to draw from the large elbow vein that popped into view, but Larry shook his head. "This one," he said, pointing to a much smaller vein. I looked dubiously at the patient. He winked at me. "Do it," he said. There were almost 30 bloods to draw that morning. By the last of them, I was able to take blood easily from veins I could hardly see. Larry came with me every morning. At the end of the week, I was able to find hidden veins by touch alone and draw bloods that I would not have thought possible. Several of the men told me they could barely feel the needle. "A quick learn, kid," Larry said, "looking good." It had meant a lot to me because praise was hard to come by in medical training. What lovely symbolism there is in this story. In his weakness, the junkie served the young doctor, but as a result, life and healing has been brought to many since. And so each of us may have left much more behind than we may ever know.
Rachel Remen goes on to say that this junkie that served her in that way was later found dead due to a drug bust gone wrong, and he died in the same hospital. A junkie serves a doctor. Great opportunities often disguise themselves in small tasks, Rick Warren said. And Edmund Burke said, "Nobody made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could do only a little." And I love these words, of course, of Jesus. "Give," Jesus said, "and it will be given unto you. Freely you have received, freely give." Our theme of camp is inspired to serve. And may that be true for all of us as we recognise that you and I were never designed to be alone. We were designed to connect. We were designed to belong. And when we connect and when we belong, our natural desire will be to serve, not help, not fix, but as equals reach out to people and make a huge difference in their lives. May God strengthen and bless our efforts as we serve and minister to each other in our communities. Carol's going to lead us in prayer. Would you care to bow your heads?
Dear Father, you've asked us to be your servant and to joyously serve those around us. You know our hearts. You know who needs us this week and how we can best serve them. Please prompt us to know who and especially how. Thank you for the reciprocity of service that connects and strengthens us each day. In your name, amen.
Thank you and God's blessings. Thank you.
Thank you.